There's a moment that happens to almost everyone past a certain age, usually without warning. You've been sitting for a while, reading, watching television, riding in a car, and when you finally stand up, your legs feel like they belong to someone else. Heavy, stiff, sometimes cold, no matter how many layers of socks you've got on. And if you've ever been jolted awake at 3 in the morning by a cramp in your calf so sharp it made you gasp, you already know exactly the feeling I'm describing. Here's what almost nobody tells you about that feeling. It isn't just getting older, it's your circulatory system trying to get your attention. And what makes this particularly frustrating is that so many people doing everything right, cutting salt, watching their weight, walking when they can, still deal with heavy, aching, cold legs by the end of the day. Because the piece nobody explains clearly is which foods actually reach the blood vessels in your legs and make a measurable difference, and which ones are just noise. Today, we're going to walk through 7 fruits that show up again and again in circulation-focused nutrition research, ranked by how directly they seem to support blood flow to the legs and feet. Real mechanisms, real practical ways to use them, and one small daily habit at the end that ties everything together. And I'll tell you honestly, fruit number 1 on this list surprised me the first time I really dug into the research behind it. It's inexpensive, it's sitting in produce sections everywhere, and its relationship to blood vessel health is something most people have simply never had explained to them in plain language. Before we get into the list, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? And what's going on with your legs? Heaviness, cold feet, cramping, that tingling, pins and needles feeling. Drop your city and a quick note in the comments. I read every one of them. Now, let's get into it. But first, I want to spend just a few minutes on the biology behind all of this, because without it, none of the 7 fruits will make sense the way they should. Your legs are about as far from your heart as blood can travel. Every drop that reaches your toes has made the full trip down, and then it has to fight its way back up, against gravity, through your veins. When you're younger, your arteries are elastic. They stretch and spring back with every heartbeat, almost like a healthy rubber hose, pushing blood along efficiently. But somewhere along the way, often starting quietly in the 40s and becoming more noticeable in the 60s and beyond, those artery walls begin to stiffen. The inner lining of your blood vessels, called the endothelium, plays a huge role here. A healthy endothelium produces something called nitric oxide, a molecule whose entire job is to tell blood vessels, relax, widen, let more blood through. When endothelial function declines, nitric oxide production drops with it. Less nitric oxide means narrower vessels. Narrower vessels mean slower blood flow. And slower blood flow means blood tends to pool in the lower legs, instead of circulating the way it should. That's the heaviness you feel by evening. That's the cold feet that won't warm up. That's very often the cramp that wakes you at 3 in the morning. And that, in a nutshell, is exactly what the 7 fruits on today's list are believed to help address. Some by supporting nitric oxide production directly, some by protecting the endothelium from damage, and some by addressing the inflammation that quietly stiffens vessels over the years. I think about a patient I'll call Margaret, a woman in her late 60s who came in describing exactly this pattern, fine in the morning, heavy and swollen by 6 in the evening, and cramping most nights. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She just didn't know which small, specific changes actually mattered. That's really what today is about. Not another generic eat healthy lecture, but specifics. Let's start the countdown. It's so ordinary that people walk right past it in the produce aisle without a second thought. But the apple has a specific role in vascular health worth understanding. The skin of the apple is rich in a compound called quercetin, an antioxidant that appears in the research to help protect the endothelial lining of blood vessels from the slow, low-grade inflammation that contributes to arterial stiffening over time. When that lining stays healthier, vessels tend to retain more of their ability to relax and widen, which means blood can reach the legs with less resistance. Apples also contain pectin, a soluble fiber that's been studied for its role in helping manage LDL cholesterol, the type that can gradually build up along artery walls and narrow the space blood has to move through. The detail that matters here: Eat the apple with the skin on. That's where the quercetin is concentrated. Wash it thoroughly, then eat it whole, sliced into your morning oatmeal or as a simple afternoon snack. I remember a patient, I'll call him Walter, who had spent decades peeling every apple he ate because that's what he'd always done. Something as small as leaving the skin on became one of the easiest changes he made. No extra cost, no extra effort, just a habit shift. This one's probably already sitting on your kitchen counter, which is good news because there's nothing to go searching for. Most people know bananas are high in potassium, but fewer understand exactly why that matters for circulation in the legs. Potassium plays a central role in blood pressure regulation. When potassium levels run low, which is fairly common in older adults, often without anyone realizing it, blood vessel walls tend to contract more tightly than they need to. That extra constriction narrows the vessels feeding the legs and can contribute to the tingling, numbness, and pins and needles sensation many people notice after sitting for even a short while. Bananas also provide a meaningful amount of magnesium, a mineral that works alongside potassium to help relax the smooth muscle inside artery walls. This is particularly relevant for people who deal with nighttime leg cramps, those sudden, sharp calf contractions that leave the muscle sore well into the next day. In many cases, those cramps seem to reflect the fact that leg muscles aren't getting quite enough blood flow during the hours when circulation naturally slows. There's a third layer worth knowing. Bananas contain vitamin B6, which plays a role in the body's production of nitric oxide, that same vasodilating molecule we talked about earlier. You're going to hear me mention nitric oxide throughout this video because it really does sit at the center of healthy leg circulation as we age. A simple target, 1 banana a day, whether sliced over plain yogurt, blended into a smoothie, or eaten on its own as a mid-morning snack. Here's where things get genuinely interesting because watermelon works through a mechanism most people have never heard of. Watermelon is unusually rich in an amino acid called L-citrulline. Inside the body, L-citrulline converts into another amino acid, L-arginine, which serves as a direct building block for nitric oxide production. And as we've established, more nitric oxide generally means wider, more relaxed vessels, and blood that's better able to reach the smallest capillaries in the feet and toes, rather than stalling partway down the leg. Some research on L-citrulline supplementation has pointed to improvements in arterial stiffness, particularly among older adults. The vessels weren't just opening temporarily, they appeared to become somewhat more flexible with consistent use over time. It's an area of ongoing study, and results vary, but the underlying mechanism is well established. Here's a detail almost everyone gets wrong. The highest concentration of L-citrulline in a watermelon isn't in the sweet red flesh most people eat. It's in the white rind, that pale strip between the pink fruit and the green skin that nearly everyone throws directly in the trash. You can enjoy watermelon fresh, cubed as a mid-afternoon snack, or blended with a few mint leaves for a hydrating drink. If you want to capture more of that potential benefit, try blending some of the white rind in along with the flesh. The flavor is mild enough that you likely won't even notice it. If you're finding this helpful so far, drop a 5 in the comments. It lets me know you're getting value from this, and it genuinely helps. This tropical fruit has a quiet talent for circulation that comes down to a single enzyme you won't find concentrated the same way in most other common fruits. That enzyme is bromelain. Bromelain has been studied for its potential to influence how freely blood moves through the vessels. Specifically, its association with reducing the tendency of blood to become overly thick or sticky, something that becomes more common after 60 as inflammatory markers tend to rise. When blood moves with less resistance, the practical result can be better delivery of oxygen and nutrients to the leg muscles, and less of that swollen, heavy feeling in the ankles and feet that many older adults simply learn to live with. Bromelain also carries notable anti-inflammatory properties, which matters because chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the central reasons artery walls lose elasticity with age. Every bit of unchecked inflammation nudges vessels toward being a little stiffer, a little less responsive, and bromelain appears to work quietly against that process. Pineapple also provides manganese and vitamin C, both of which support collagen production. the structural protein that helps keep blood vessel walls strong and resilient. Here's a detail worth knowing. Bromelain is most concentrated in the fibrous core of the pineapple, the part most people cut out and discard. Eat pineapple fresh, ideally earlier in the day, and include a bit of that core when you can. I think of a patient, Ruth, who'd been cutting out and tossing the core of every pineapple she bought for years. Once she started blending small pieces of it into her smoothies, she said it became one of those small habits that felt oddly satisfying, using the whole fruit instead of wasting part of it. Yes, technically, avocado is a fruit, one most people associate with toast and not much else. But what it does for leg circulation goes well beyond its reputation. Your arteries face two major long-term threats. The first is LDL cholesterol, which can gradually deposit along vessel walls and narrow the space blood needs to move through. The second is oxidative damage, the slow, largely invisible process where free radicals attack the delicate inner lining of the arteries and accelerate stiffening over the years. Avocado appears to work against both. Its monounsaturated fats, primarily oleic acid, the same healthy fat found in olive oil, are associated with helping lower LDL cholesterol while supporting HDL, the protective type that helps clear harmful deposits from artery walls. A better balance between the two generally means cleaner, more open pathways for blood to reach the legs. Avocado is also one of the richest fruit sources of vitamin E, specifically alpha-tocopherol, which acts as a protective shield for the endothelial cells lining blood vessels, the very same cells responsible for producing nitric oxide. When oxidative stress damages those cells, nitric oxide production tends to drop, and vessels lose some of their ability to dilate properly. Vitamin E helps keep those cells intact and functioning well. One detail that surprises people: avocado actually contains more potassium per serving than a banana does, meaning even more support for blood pressure regulation and vascular relaxation in the legs. A reasonable target is half an avocado with dinner, 4 or more evenings a week, sliced over a salad with tomatoes and olive oil, or mashed alongside whatever protein you're already having. The simplicity is the point. Consistency is what actually makes a difference. I already know what some of you are thinking. Prunes? Really? I understand. This isn't the glamorous pic. Nobody's posting a beautifully lit photo of dried plums. But when it comes to supporting the blood vessels that feed the legs over the long term, this humble, wrinkled little fruit punches well above its weight. Dried plums are notably rich in polyphenols, a class of plant compounds that act as potent antioxidants inside the vascular system. These polyphenols appear to specifically target the chronic low-grade inflammation that quietly erodes arterial flexibility over the years, not the kind of inflammation you can feel, like a sore joint, but the invisible biochemical process happening inside vessel walls that gradually reduces their ability to expand and contract with each heartbeat. That slow loss of responsiveness is one of the most predictable reasons blood flow to the legs declines with age. Dried plums also provide a meaningful amount of vitamin K, which plays a role in regulating how calcium behaves in the body. Without adequate vitamin K, calcium can end up depositing in places it doesn't belong, including inside artery walls, a process called vascular calcification, which essentially hardens vessels from the inside. Vitamin K helps direct calcium toward the bones, where it's needed, and away from the arteries. Dried plums also contain boron, a trace mineral that some research has linked to vascular health and bone density in older adults, two systems that tend to decline together more often than people realize. A simple, practical target: 4 to 5 dried plums a day, eaten as a snack or chopped into oatmeal or plain yogurt. Small, consistent, quietly effective. And now we arrive at number 1, the fruit I mentioned at the very start, the one that genuinely surprised me when I first looked closely at the research behind it. What sets grapes apart is a compound called resveratrol, concentrated primarily in the skin, which has been the subject of extensive cardiovascular research over the past 2 decades. Once you understand what resveratrol is believed to do inside blood vessels, it's easier to see why nothing else on this list quite compares. First, resveratrol is associated with stimulating nitric oxide production in endothelial cells. We've circled back to nitric oxide throughout this entire video, and here it is again. Resveratrol doesn't just support the process. Research suggests it actively drives it, increasing the availability of the one-molecule aging vessels seem to need most to keep blood flowing freely to the legs. Second, resveratrol carries some of the most studied natural anti-inflammatory effects in vascular research, appearing to target the inflammatory pathways behind arterial stiffening. The gradual hardening process that narrows vessels decade after decade and progressively restricts circulation to the lower limbs. Third, and this is the layer that puts grapes above everything else on this list, resveratrol appears to help protect artery walls from the oxidation of LDL cholesterol. It's not simply the presence of LDL that creates blockages. It's what happens when that cholesterol becomes oxidized and starts embedding itself into the vessel lining. Resveratrol seems to interrupt that process closer to its source. Grapes are also rich in anthocyanins, particularly in the red and purple varieties, which are thought to support the smallest blood vessels in the feet and calves, the very first capillaries to suffer when circulation begins to decline. A reasonable approach: a small handful of fresh grapes, skin on, as a snack between meals, tossed into a salad, or frozen for a refreshing bite in the afternoon. Wash them thoroughly, eat them daily, but in moderation, a handful is enough. If you're finding this valuable, this is a good moment for a quick favor. If you found even one of these useful so far, a quick like helps this reach more people who need it. Now, let's keep going, because there's one more piece that ties everything together. Beyond the 7 fruits, there's a simple morning habit that appears to support leg circulation through 3 different mechanisms at once. A combination of fresh lemon, ginger, and cinnamon, taken first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. Lemon provides a concentrated dose of vitamin C, one of the more important antioxidants for protecting the endothelial lining of blood vessels. Vitamin C also supports collagen production, again, that structural protein that keeps artery walls strong and flexible. Ginger contains a compound called gingerol, studied for anti-inflammatory and mild anticoagulant properties. Gingerol appears to help blood move through vessels with less friction, potentially reducing the kind of microclotting that can restrict flow to the legs over time. Cinnamon has been studied for its potential to improve the responsiveness of the smallest blood vessels, the peripheral capillaries responsible for delivering oxygen and warmth to the hands and feet. For anyone who deals with consistently cold extremities, that's particularly relevant. Here's the preparation. Squeeze half a fresh lemon into a cup of warm, not boiling, water, since excessive heat can break down vitamin C. Add a teaspoon of freshly grated ginger and half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Stir well and drink it every morning, ideally at least 20 minutes before breakfast. Many people who try this report noticeable warmth in their feet, less heaviness during walks, and a bit more energy within the first 2 to 3 weeks of consistent use. Everyone responds a little differently, so give it time before judging whether it's working for you. Before we close, I want to share 3 mistakes I see constantly, ones that quietly undermine everything we've covered today. The first mistake is throwing away the most beneficial part of the fruit. We saw this with the apple skin, the watermelon rind, and the pineapple core. In each case, the compound most associated with circulation benefits is concentrated in the part most people discard without a second thought. You don't have to eat anything unpleasant. Just knowing where the value tends to sit changes how you approach your next piece of fruit. The second mistake is assuming more is always better. Eating 10 grapes doesn't give you double the benefit of 5. Fruit contains natural sugars, and eating it without moderation can work against blood glucose control, which over time can damage the very blood vessels you're trying to protect. Consistency matters far more than quantity. A small amount every day will generally outperform a large amount once a week. The third mistake is expecting overnight results. Circulation didn't decline in a week, and it typically doesn't recover in one either. Most people who notice meaningful improvement describe a timeline of roughly 3 to 6 weeks of sustained daily habits. Knowing that up front makes you far less likely to give up before real change has a chance to show up. One important note: if the heaviness in your legs, cold feet, or cramping is severe, getting worse over time, or noticeably affects one leg much more than the other, please see your doctor. These fruits and habits can be genuinely helpful allies, but they're not a substitute for a proper medical evaluation when your symptoms point to something that needs closer attention. Have you noticed any of these patterns in your own legs? The heaviness, the cold feet, the cramping? I'd genuinely like to know. And of these 7 fruits, which one are you going to start with first? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this video gave you something useful today, it would mean a lot if you hit subscribe. It's how this kind of practical, evidence-informed health information keeps reaching people who need it, and it costs you nothing but a tap. My name is Dr. Josephine Healthcare, and I've spent my career in family and general medicine, helping people understand the small, practical changes that genuinely add up over time. Take care of your legs, and I'll see you in the next one.